Today's story was actually featured in a Netflix true crime documentary, and honestly, it's one of the most heartbreaking cases I've ever come across. Imagine dedicating your life to someone you deeply love and care for, only for that same person to be the one who takes everything away, even your life. If you're into true crime documentaries, feel free to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our weekly uploads, usually once or twice a week. All right, let's get into it. On the night of November 8, 2010, 53-year-old Bic Pan and a few of her friends were learning how to line dance at a church in Toronto, Canada. Bic and her friends had been going to the dance class every week for a while, and Bic finally felt like she was getting the hang of it. She was average height with long black hair, and she wore workout clothes, glasses, and bright red lipstick. And while she danced, she felt her feet aching and sweat running down her face. But she couldn't stop laughing because she was having so much fun. When the last song ended, she and her friends made their way out of the church into the parking lot. It was a mild November night for Toronto, with temperatures around 50 degrees Fahrenheit. But after getting hot and sweaty while dancing, Bic felt a slight chill when she stepped outside. She and her friends laughed more as they talked about some of their least graceful moments on the dance floor. Then they all said goodnight and that they'd see each other at the church the following week for more line dancing. Bic walked across the parking lot, got into her Lexus, and drove off toward her house in the suburbs. As she drove, she looked out the windshield at Toronto passing by, thinking about what a fun night she'd had. She felt happy, like she belonged in Toronto. And that was a big deal for Bic, because it had taken her a long time to feel that way. Bic had come to Canada about 30 years earlier, in the late 1970s, when her family fled Vietnam as political refugees after the Vietnam War. She had grown up speaking Vietnamese and Cantonese, and when she came to Canada in her 20s, learning English had been hard for her. She struggled to find work and didn't feel like she fit in anywhere. But then, Bic reconnected with a man she knew briefly in Vietnam, Han Pan. Like Bic, Han had come to Canada from Vietnam with his family after the war, and he also grew up speaking Vietnamese and Cantonese. So when Bic and Han met in Canada, it felt like they finally had someone who understood everything they'd been through. Bic fell in love, got married, and a few years later started a family. First a daughter, then a son. Together, Bic and Han worked hard to earn money and save enough to give their children more opportunities than they ever had growing up. And while life had never been easy, Bic felt that she and Han had achieved that goal. When their kids were young, they had done really well in school, participated in activities, and made great friends. Now their kids were in their 20s, pursuing stable careers, and Bic finally allowed herself to relax and enjoy the home she'd built over the last 30 years. At about 9:30 p.m., Bic pulled into her secluded neighborhood in Markham, a large suburb of Toronto, and drove off toward her house. Bic two-story homes lined the streets, and the neighborhood was calm and quiet. Bic pulled into her driveway and noticed most of the trees in the yards had started losing their leaves. She thought it was a shame. She loved the burst of color the changing leaves brought in early fall. Bic opened the garage door and parked her Lexus next to her husband Han's Mercedes-Benz. She closed the garage door, stepped out of her car, and winced a little because her feet were even more sore from the line dancing. Then she went inside and walked down the long hall into the living room. Bic's house was big, with high ceilings, hardwood floors, a basement converted into a family room, and a staircase leading to 4 bedrooms upstairs. But her favorite possession in the house was the piano in the living room. When Bic and Han were younger, they had worked and saved to buy that piano for their daughter, Jennifer. And as Jennifer grew up, they knew they'd spent their money wisely. She had been a gifted piano player from a young age. Even now, at 24, she still played regularly and made extra money teaching piano lessons. Listening to her daughter play was still one of Bic's favorite things in the world. Bic walked through the living room, past the piano, and slowly made her way upstairs. Her feet were pounding, so she held the banister to make the climb easier. When she reached the second-floor hallway, her daughter, Jennifer, popped out of her bedroom, smiling and saying hello. Jennifer was 5'7", with black hair tied into a long ponytail, wearing a white sweatshirt, black yoga pants, and glasses with black frames. She was about to return to school to pursue a pharmacy degree. She had lived with a friend closer to Toronto, but recently moved back home and managed to save a good amount of money from teaching piano lessons. Bic knew Jennifer saw her Vietnamese parents as somewhat old-fashioned, but she hoped she and Han had passed on their beliefs about hard work and saving money. She talked in Vietnamese, and when Bic shared stories from dance class, Jennifer laughed, and her laugh was infectious, making Bic laugh too. Then Bic said she wanted to get changed, so Jennifer went back to her room and Bic headed to her bedroom. When Bic walked in, Han was already drifting to sleep, but he woke up enough to greet her and ask how class went. Bic said she had a great time and couldn't wait for next week. When she changed into her Winnie the Pooh pajamas, she told Han goodnight and went back downstairs. She grabbed a large bowl from the kitchen cabinet, filled it with ice-cold water, and carried it to the living room. She sat on the couch, set the bowl on the floor, and placed her feet inside it. She smiled and leaned back. The ache in her feet was finally easing. She grabbed the remote, turned on the TV, and put on a Chinese news channel in Cantonese. Even though she felt at home in Canada now, she still enjoyed ending her nights watching the news in one of her first languages. Then, Bic heard footsteps coming downstairs. She turned and saw Jennifer walking into the living room. Jennifer headed toward her mother, then suddenly stopped. She looked out the living room window toward the street, like she saw something she couldn't quite figure out. She walked to the front door, looked out the small window, and leaned in closer. Bic turned away from the TV and asked if everything was okay. Jennifer realized what she saw was just a car parked across the street, stepped back, and told her mom everything was fine. She said goodnight and went upstairs. Bic returned her attention to the TV, stretching out on the couch. It felt like the perfect end to her day. At about 10:15 p.m., about 45 minutes after Bic got home, she was still downstairs soaking her feet and watching the news. Jennifer was in bed upstairs, her room filled with college textbooks. She knew she'd eventually need to start studying again, but classes were still a couple of months away. Instead, she spent the night texting friends and her ex-boyfriend, Daniel Wang. Daniel and Jennifer had dated for years, since high school. She once thought they'd get married, but over a year earlier, Daniel broke up with her and started seeing someone else. Still, they remained friends. They had a lot in common and often gave each other advice. Recently, their texts had become a little flirtatious, and Jennifer hoped they might get back together. She lay in bed with her phone, debating whether to send another text. But then she heard the front door open and slam shut. Then footsteps moved through the house. Confused, Jennifer got up, tucked her phone into her waistband, opened her bedroom door, and called downstairs to her mother. Then she heard her mother screaming. Jennifer rushed into the hallway, but before she could do anything, she heard heavy footsteps racing up the stairs. Suddenly, a huge man dressed in black ran toward her. She heard Bic shout something in Vietnamese and men downstairs yelling in English. Jennifer screamed for her mother again as the man charged up the stairs. When he reached the top, he grabbed Jennifer, raised a pistol to her face, and yelled, "Where's the money?" Then he shoved her back into her bedroom. Inside the room, he repeated the demand. Jennifer ran to her bedside table, opened the drawer, grabbed an envelope, and pulled out $2,500, money she saved from teaching piano. The man snatched the cash and stuffed it into his pocket. Then he grabbed her arm and dragged her downstairs to the living room. Jennifer looked around but didn't see her parents. The man led her to the basement door. When he opened it, her heart pounded. She could hear her mother and father shouting in Vietnamese and Cantonese. They sounded terrified. The man ordered Jennifer downstairs. With each step, her parents' voices grew louder. She reached the bottom and saw her parents on the basement couch, with two more men in black pointing guns at them, screaming for money. Bick and Han were frantic, struggling to answer in English, and the gunmen grew angrier, shouting louder. Jennifer yelled in Vietnamese for her parents to stay calm. Han looked up, saw Jennifer at the stairs, and took a breath. He looked at one gunman and said in English, "Please don't hurt our daughter." The gunman turned to the man holding Jennifer and told him to take her upstairs and keep searching for money. The big man dragged Jennifer back upstairs. As they climbed, she heard her parents screaming again and the gunman shouting back. He forced Jennifer from room to room, making her pull out drawers, flip mattresses, and tear apart the house. All she found was another $1,000 hidden in Bick's bedside table. She insisted that was all she knew about. Nearly 20 minutes after the intruders entered the home, the man marched Jennifer across the upstairs hallway. At the top of the stairs, he ordered her to get on the floor. He pulled two long black shoelaces from his pocket, crouched down, grabbed her arm, and tied it to the metal bar supporting the banister. Then he tied her hands behind her back with the second shoelace. Once satisfied she was restrained, he left her and went downstairs. She heard the basement door slam. Jennifer tried to stay calm, but she was near panicked. As she lay there, she realized her hands had a little movement. She took a deep breath, stretched her fingers toward her phone, tucked in her waistband, and slowly pulled it out. She held it between her bound hands and craned her neck enough to see the keypad. Then the basement door flew open. She heard footsteps pounding across the floor and the front door opening and closing. She thought she heard one of her parents scream, then the front door again. Jennifer took another breath, looked at her phone, and managed to dial 911. When the operator answered, she screamed that people had broken into her house. They didn't know if her parents were okay, and they needed to send help immediately. Minutes later, Constable Mike Stesko sped through the Pond neighborhood with sirens blaring. His rookie partner, Brian Derrick, sat beside him. Shocked, break-ins were rare in this area. Stesko knew danger could happen anywhere, even in wealthy neighborhoods. He slowed when he saw the flashing lights outside the Pond home. He parked, and he and Derrick stepped out. Immediately, Stesko realized this was far worse than a robbery. Jennifer's father, Han, was lying on the driveway, blood pouring down his face. Paramedics tended to Han while Stesko, Derrick, and other officers approached the front door. Not knowing if the intruders were still inside, they drew their weapons and prepared to sweep the house. The officers opened the door and they rushed inside. They immediately heard a young woman screaming upstairs. Derrick and others ran up, past Jennifer, who was tied to the banister, and called 911. They cleared the rooms, then returned to cut her loose. He helped her to her feet and walked her downstairs. Jennifer repeatedly asked if her parents were okay, but Derrick didn't know. Inside, Jennifer saw Han being loaded into an ambulance. She yelled, "Daddy, are you okay?" He didn't respond. The ambulance door shut, the sirens blared, and he was rushed to the hospital. Paramedics then surrounded Jennifer, checking her for injuries. Meanwhile, Constable Stesko followed a trail of blood inside, leading from the living room to the basement door. The basement hadn't been cleared, so he drew his weapon. He opened the door and slowly descended, each step creaking. Halfway down, he saw into the family room and froze. He shouted for paramedics.
He rushed on the stairs to someone lying face down with a blood-soaked blanket covering their face and back. He yelled to see if they'd respond, but he knew it was too late. Paramedics rushed in but couldn't revive the victim. Jennifer's mother, Bick, was dead on the basement floor. At 1:30 a.m. on November 9, over 3 hours after the invasion began, Jennifer sat on a hospital bed. Doctors examined her. She was physically okay and gave her anxiety medication. Constable Derek entered the room. He asked if she was okay. She said she was, but she wanted to know about her parents. Gently, he told her that her father had been airlifted to Toronto and placed in a medically induced coma. Jennifer asked if he would be okay, but Derek said it was too early to tell. Then she asked about her mother. Derek looked down, then back at Jennifer and told her he was sorry. Her mother had been killed. Jennifer stared at him silently, too shocked to speak. Derek apologized again and said they needed her to come to the station to help the investigation. Jennifer nodded. He helped her gather her things and took her to the squad car. As they drove through the dark streets, Jennifer stared out the window, realizing her life had changed forever. At 2:45 a.m., Derek led her into an interrogation room. He sat to the side while a York Regional Police officer interviewed her. Jennifer walked him through everything: the man in black, being dragged downstairs, seeing her parents with gunmen, being tied to the banister, and calling 911. She said she heard one intruder running outside, then someone screaming. She now thought that was her father escaping. This found him in the driveway, confirming her suspicion. The officer asked if she could identify the men. She said no.
They wore black and had their faces covered. Then he asked about her relationship with Daniel Wong. Jennifer said they had dated, but were now just friends. The officer asked if she knew Daniel was a drug dealer. Jennifer denied it, saying he only sold some marijuana in college. He insisted Daniel had nothing to do with any of this. After 2 hours, all police had was that they were searching for 3 tall young men, but they still considered Daniel a possible suspect. At 10 a.m. on November 8th, Jennifer paced in a Toronto hospital waiting room with her younger brother, both waiting for news about their dad. She hadn't slept in over 24 hours and felt jittery, but forced herself to stay awake. A doctor entered with a serious expression. Jennifer and her brother held their breath. Then the doctor said things looked good and he believed Han would recover. They hugged with relief, but he warned it could take days for Han to wake from the coma. After the doctor left, Jennifer and her brother stood silently. The good news made them realize they hadn't truly faced what happened to their mother. Finally, Jennifer said she would start arranging the funeral. The detective immediately asked about Daniel's past as a drug dealer. Daniel admitted he sold marijuana in college and had been busted, but said he now managed a pizza shop and didn't deal anymore. The detective then asked about Jennifer's parents. Daniel said they were strict, focused on Jennifer's grades, and that many Asian immigrant parents were similar. The detective then asked if Daniel knew anyone who might want to hurt Jennifer or her family. For the first time, Daniel hesitated. The detective leaned in, urging him to share. Daniel said months earlier, Jennifer called him crying and told him she had been attacked near her house and raped by a group of men. He said she told no one else and swore him to secrecy because she felt ashamed. The detective was stunned. Jennifer had never mentioned this, but Daniel insisted it was true. After the interview, police still saw Daniel as a suspect, but they wanted to question Jennifer about the alleged attack. On November 11th, 3 days after the home invasion, Jennifer returned for a second interview. Meanwhile, investigators searched the Pan home again and found a key piece of evidence they missed earlier. Combined with Jennifer's new interview, they were led toward a new suspect. On November 12th, 4 days after the invasion, Han woke up from his coma. When he spoke to police, he confirmed they were on the right track. His information, along with evidence and cell phone data, helped police reconstruct what they believe happened that night. Based on Han's information, evidence found at the scene of the crime, interviews and cell phone data collected throughout the investigation, here is a reconstruction of what police believe happened on the night of the fatal home invasion. November 8, 2010. At 10:15 p.m., 3 gunmen, dressed in black, sat in a car parked across from the Pan house, each holding a pistol. One gunman watched the house, saw the TV flickering downstairs and a bedroom light on upstairs. He took a deep breath, looked at the others, and said it was time. They got out, crouched low, ran across the street, opened the front door, and rushed inside. Bix looked up from the TV, and the gunman began shouting. One gunman grabbed her off the couch. The bowl she'd been soaking her feet in tipped over, water spilling across the hardwood floor. A gunman dragged Bix downstairs to the basement. Once in the basement, the gunman threw Han onto the couch, where Bix was already sitting and screaming. The 2 gunmen with them shouted at Bix and Han again and again, demanding to know where their money was. Moments later, the 3rd gunman came into the basement, leading Jennifer. Jennifer immediately yelled to her parents, begging them to stay calm. When Han saw his daughter, he began shouting at the gunman not to hurt her. The 3rd gunman then took Jennifer out of the basement, leaving the other 2 alone with Bix and Han. But Bix and Han continued to plead desperately, their voices only growing louder. They begged the gunman to spare them and to spare their daughter. The 2 gunmen began to lose their nerve. It was becoming harder to shoot 2 terrified people begging for their lives right in front of them. One of the gunmen walked across the room, grabbed a blanket from the arm of the couch, and threw it over Bix and Han's heads, blocking them from view to make it easier to be violent. He then stepped back to join his partner, both of them aiming their guns at the couple. Still, Bix and Han cried out from under the blanket, begging them to please spare our daughter. Finally, the 2 gunmen looked at each other, raised their weapons, one aiming at Bix, the other at Han, and fired. The first bullet tore through the blanket and struck Han near the corner of his right eye. Under the blanket, he felt blood streaming down his face as his head slumped to the side. The second gunman's bullet hit Bix in the neck, staining the blanket with blood. Both men fired again, striking each victim in the shoulder. Under the blanket, Bix and Han stopped moving. But one gunman stepped closer, raised his weapon to where Bix's head was, and fired once more. The bullet passed through her skull. She died right there on the basement couch. Upstairs on the 2nd floor, the 3rd gunman stood over Jennifer, who was tied to the banister. When he heard the shots, he ran downstairs, opened the basement door, and yelled for his partners to leave. Then, he bolted outside. In the basement, the other 2 gunmen looked at the bodies on the couch, then rushed up the steps. Neither of them saw Han, still alive, pull himself from under the blanket and drag his wife's body onto the floor. They didn't hear him as he struggled to his hands and knees and slowly followed them up the stairs. The 2 gunmen, focused only on escaping, sprinted through the living room. But they stopped when they heard shouting. They turned to see Jennifer at the top of the stairs, a phone clutched in her bound hands. Jennifer told them she wouldn't call 911 until they heard their car drive away, giving them extra time to escape. Jennifer Pan, the daughter who had once made Bix and Han so proud, had orchestrated their murders. Jennifer had been living a lie for nearly a decade, and her parents had finally uncovered it. For years, Bix and Han believed Jennifer was a straight-A student who excelled in college.
But in truth, Jennifer had struggled badly and never even graduated high school. Terrified of disappointing her strict parents, Jennifer began forging report cards. As the lies grew, she forged a high school diploma, a university acceptance letter, and even created a fake scholarship. While her parents thought she was thriving at university, she was actually living with her boyfriend Daniel, making money by teaching piano, the one skill she was truly gifted at. She bought college textbooks, filled them with fake notes, and brought them home to keep up the illusion. Jennifer became so skilled at lying that after 4 more years of pretending, she convinced her parents she had graduated with honors and earned a degree that qualified her to become a pharmacist. She even made excuses as to why they couldn't attend the ceremony. But the lies kept growing. She forged job documents, created a fake work schedule, and told her parents she was living with a friend near her supposed job. In reality, she spent her days in cafes, visiting Daniel at work, teaching occasional lessons, and then returning to Daniel's home. Everything collapsed when Daniel broke up with her, forcing her to move back home. Han quickly grew suspicious. She never rushed to work, never seemed busy, and never wanted to meet near her supposed workplace. One day, Han convinced Bick to follow her. Bick discovered Jennifer didn't have a job at all. Soon, the truth unraveled. Even though she was 24, her parents imposed strict rules. She couldn't leave the house except to teach piano. They restricted her internet use and gave her an old flip phone, which Han monitored. They forced her to take courses to get her real high school diploma and then made her enroll in a small college program to truly become a pharmacist. Jennifer felt trapped, a prisoner in her own home. And she wanted out. She wanted the inheritance she believed she'd receive after her parents' deaths. She knew she didn't have the nerve to do it herself, so she turned to Daniel, believing he knew people through his drug-dealing past. But with their relationship broken, she first had to win him back. She called him one night, crying, lying again, this time claiming she had been attacked and raped. Daniel began talking to her again. Eventually, she offered him money to find people to kill her parents. Daniel contacted an old associate who then brought in 2 more men. Jennifer paid the 3 men to murder her parents, stage it as a robbery, and make her appear to be a victim. She gave them the layout of the house and even unlocked the front door before going downstairs to say goodnight to her mother, who was soaking her feet on the night of the attack. The truth began unraveling for investigators when they found a hidden burner phone in Jennifer's room, the one Daniel had bought her. On it were incriminating texts between Jennifer, Daniel, and another man, including messages sent on the night of the murders. They also discovered that Jennifer had called Daniel and the 3rd man from the hospital to warn them that Han was going to survive. When Han awoke from his medically induced coma, he told police what he saw. As he begged the gunman not to hurt Jennifer, he watched his daughter lean toward the gunman and whisper something casually. Then Jennifer and the gunman laughed and walked up the stairs together. In that moment, Han realized his daughter had arranged their execution. Jennifer Pan, Daniel Wong, and 2 of the 3 gunmen were convicted of first-degree murder and attempted murder. Each received 25 years without parole, the maximum sentence in Canada. The 3rd gunman received 18 years. After the trial, Han released a statement. He said he missed his wife terribly and hoped that one day Jennifer might still become an honest person.
That's it for our story, guys. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear more true crime documentaries, please consider subscribing and hit the notification bell so you never miss our weekly uploads. Stay safe, everyone. See you next time.